The Games Press wrote articles. Well, it was mostly the Games Press. There were a couple of mainstream outlets that did as well, but there were 10 articles that were published on the same day on August 28th, 2014, and 9 articles that followed in the coming days that declared an end to the gamer identity. Um, Obviously, a lot of people are upset about this, but you were talking earlier about the positive aspects of gaming. Isn't what the Games Press was trying to do in that moment, perhaps very poorly, what they were trying to do is also talk about the negative aspects of gaming? And are there negative aspects of gaming? A negative subculture where the 12-year-old kid on Call of Duty uses the N-word or makes sexual references towards a woman who's in the game?
Yeah, I think that I'll make a comparison to the Me Too movement here. The Me Too movement, initially, I was very on board. I mean, I thought that just in many workplaces, they were not living up to 21st century standards. They needed a reboot. Too many men had not gotten the message, and this was coming through loud and clear. There was a place for that in gaming, but in both cases, what quickly happened, what I saw happen with the Me Too movement, is it became more and more accusative and uh, just beginning to depict all men as corrupt and in need of re-education, just very harsh indictment of society, and then a lot of false accusations, wrongful, exaggerated, baseless accusations, and we entered a kind of gender war zone. And I think what happened with Me Too, it was in some ways we saw this happen with the critiques of Gamergate. The critiques of gamers. Initially, some good points. I think a lot of gamers wouldn't have minded. It just went too far. It became too aggressive and unforgiving. And that's just no way for a social movement to advance. I mean, you can scare people and bully them, and people will, for a while, go along with you, even if they don't agree, because they're intimidated. But it doesn't lead to progress. It leads to its opposite. It breeds fanaticism.
In my interview with Silverwolfcc yesterday, she talked about how she is a bisexual woman who likes sexy female characters. However, she also talked about how there are different ways to do it, and that some ways can present the framing of the scene in a objectifying way, and other ways don't. What do you think of this?
I think that what she said and making a video about that and pointing that out, and game developers can maybe learn from it, maybe change if they want to, if they agree with it. There's always room for improvement and for evolving, and I think that's all to the good. It's just when it becomes it sort of hardens into a movement that brooks no criticism and is eager to implicate others in some kind of social atrocity without any concern for what this does to them or what it does to your movement. I just see a lot of destructiveness with these causes that go too far, and I saw it a long time ago. I saw it as far back as this dates me again, but when I was in graduate school, I was interested in some of these theories in feminist theory, but I immediately saw that they were those that were most passionate about them were just simply were reality challenged. The world was not the way they described it, and so that's a long-winded answer to your original question about do I think that it was reasonable what she said? Yes, and people can learn from that, but I don't think it was reasonable much of what Sarkeesian and the those that were promoting her point of view. I don't think that was ultimately reasonable or progressive.
It seems like you're linking the attitudes and behaviors of the games journalists and those who criticized Gamergate with a larger, perhaps older attitude that you also see in some people in the feminist community towards men and boys.
Well, that's why people ask, why did you get interested? You're not a gamer. absolutely true. But I was able to see that the battle that I was fighting within feminist theory, that it was playing out in other fields. And by the way, after GamerGate, there were these battles raged in young adult literature and in poetry circles and among in sports, all sorts of areas. You would find this sort of where it was reduced to a kind of men versus women, rather than let's try to make this better for everybody. I kept seeing that, so that's there were many things that interested me in the battle over video games, but not the least is the time I entered it was when GamerGate was erupting, and it was largely I felt that the game journalists were accepting uncritically a particular version of feminism that and were ignoring that there were other voices within feminism. They were not listening. They weren't listening to us, to any critics of radical feminism or hardline feminism. And that bothered me. And I thought I had to speak up. And I thought the gamers should know that you're not a sexist just because you don't believe in agree with Anita Sarkeesian. You can still be a feminist and disagree with the view that she was promoting of all video games.
Some people in the Gamergate community had developed a negative attitude towards the word feminist and preferred terms like egalitarian instead. Do you think there's
Right.
still value? Well, first off, do you think that that's sexist of them? And second, do you think that there is still value in using the term feminist to describe the basic definition of LOL, we just want equality?
Yeah, I don't know. I think now more than before, people recognize there are many schools of feminism, and so I think the term there was a while where people just associated it with being extreme. In fact, there have been, maybe this continues to be the case, there have been a number of public opinion polls, and they'll ask you, do you call yourself a feminist? And the majority of women say no. And then they say, well, do you think that men and women should be treated equally? Do you think they deserve equal rights? And they all say yes. So how can that be? And one pollster asked women, well, if you believe in equality, why don't you call yourself a feminist? And the answers they gave were that it's too hostile to men, and that it's, what was the other, too extreme. So I think the word, when I wrote the book, Who's Still Feminism, that I warned about this, that this is a important movement, and one of the great chapters in the history of the struggle for human rights was the women's movement, and it was, but a small group had seemed to hijack, and in the name of feminism, were saying and doing a lot of things that I thought, and others, were not in this true spirit of equality. So I'm not ready. I just can't give it up. I've been a feminist all my life. My mother was a feminist in the old school style, and I think there are a lot of there's still sexists out there, and it's important to keep that movement alive and its history known to people. So I'm not going to give up. I'm going to try to do all I can to make it a mainstream and reputable movement for equality. It doesn't have to be angry and preachy and puritanical.
You've talked about how there have been other controversies or quote unquote culture war battles in other hobbies and fields. Why do you think it was the gaming community where this blew up into a massive thing?
There are a lot of gamers. I think it was even who was it? Ezra Klein, pretty early on in 2014, I think, in Vox, maybe 2015. No, I think it was 14. He was a little. He actually wrote a pretty good piece about GamerGate. It was pretty fair because he pointed out, wait a minute, there are gamers, there are millions of gamers, and a lot of them are liberal. and they're completely shocked to be called sexist and homophobic, and they don't. This is he made it clear that he was a little surprised by this attack. I think many people were, and I think that one of the reasons GamerGate grew was there were a lot of people on the sidelines at first, gamers who just thought, well, what's going on here? But then when they saw the attacks, and what would happen is the game journalists would write something very censorious, critical about gamers, and then it would be picked up by the New York Times. And then so someone who was a passionate gamer, who had many, many friends who'd gone to events and knew that it was a reasonable group of people, found the entire group just maligned in the press, in the Washington Post, and over again in the New York Times, and NPR and so forth. It was ridiculous. It was so. I think it just it blew up because it was an attack on hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people who didn't like it, didn't appreciate it, and spoke up.